It's April 1945, and the air smells like wet ash and spent diesel. The Third Reich, a regime that promised 1,000 years of glory, is now a graveyard of broken concrete and abandoned furniture. Somewhere in Western Germany, a family's dining table sits in the middle of a bombed-out street, legs in the air like it's asking the sky for an explanation. Villages that took centuries to build took minutes to come apart. And the men moving through the wreckage, boots thick with mud, faces hollowed by a year of bad sleep and worse food. They're not thinking about history. They're thinking about getting home. But something on a muddy road doesn't fit. A polished black limousine, paint so dark it mirrors the gray sky above it, not a scratch on it. Engine off. Perfectly, defiantly still. In a landscape that looks like God cleared his throat and forgot to stop, this car looks like an insult. And inside it, sitting with the posture of a man attending a formal dinner, is a German general. Spine straight, chin up, uniform pressed into submission. He is not scared, he is offended. The mud outside his door is beneath him, literally and otherwise. He is waiting for someone of sufficient rank to come and give him the ceremony he believes he is owed. The dignified surrender, the formal acknowledgement that he, despite the unfortunate circumstances, remains a man of consequence. He has no idea what's coming up the road. Look, if you believe that real history doesn't live in textbooks but in moments exactly like this one, stay with me. Because what's about to happen at this crossroads isn't just one general getting pulled out of a car. It's the sound of an entire world order cracking at the spine. Type justice in the comments if you think what Patton did next was exactly right. And if you're the kind of person who wants history told without the polish, subscribe. We don't clean this stuff up here. To understand the weight pressing down on that road, you have to look away from the limousine for a moment. Look at the faces of the American soldiers standing in the rain around it. These weren't warriors in the European sense of the word. Nobody handed them a military philosophy at birth. Nobody told them they were descended from greatness. The kid standing closest to that car door, 19 years old, maybe 20, was probably bagging groceries in Ohio 14 months ago. The one behind him fixed engines in a garage in Birmingham, Alabama. Thick hands, grease that never fully washed out from under his fingernails. These men had spent the better part of a year sleeping in holes in the earth, pulling their boots from mud that grabbed like wet concrete, eating cold food from tins in the dark, and watching, up close, in the most personal and permanent way possible, their friends get killed. Not wounded, killed, in flashes, mid-sentence, without warning or fairness or any of the narrative dignity that war movies would later invent. They were done. Bone-tired, grief-soaked, and done. To them, the war was a filthy, miserable job with a finish line they could almost see. They didn't want medals. They didn't want parades. They wanted to sleep in a real bed and eat something hot and maybe, God willing, never hear artillery again. And then there's the man in the car. The Prussian military aristocracy didn't join the army the way a kid from Nebraska joins the army. They were born into it, bred for it. They traced their bloodlines back to Frederick the Great and spent their evenings reading Clausewitz the way a priest reads scripture, reverently, with the absolute certainty that the text was written specifically for men of their caliber. They wore monocles not because they needed them, but because the monocle communicated something. They spoke 3, sometimes 4 languages. They studied the great campaigns of history the way art students study brushwork. To them, war wasn't a catastrophe to be survived. It was a high discipline, an expression of civilization's finest impulse. And when they looked at the United States Army, they didn't see soldiers. They saw a mob, a mongrel horde. That phrase appears in actual German officer correspondence from this period, and they meant every syllable of it. The sloppy salutes bothered them. The chewing gum bothered them. The mass-produced uniforms, the casual insubordination, the way American officers talked to enlisted men like they were people. All of it confirmed what they already believed, that Americans were soft, undisciplined, businessmen playing dress-up. They genuinely, sincerely believed that whatever was happening to Germany had nothing to do with being outfought. They had simply been buried under an avalanche of inferior material piloted by inferior men. The general in the limousine believed he was the only civilized person on that road. Here's the thing about that belief. It wasn't stupidity. It was something more dangerous. It was a worldview so thoroughly constructed so carefully maintained over generations of selective history and manufactured identity that no amount of burning cities could touch it. His country was literally on fire just over the horizon, and he was worried about the protocol of his surrender. If you think the blue-collar grit of those American farm kids and factory workers is what actually broke the spine of the Nazi war machine, type power right now. Because what happened next is proof of exactly that. The Americans had something the German high command genuinely could not model in their war games. They brought Detroit to the front. While German generals were crafting elegant battle plans in heated rooms, the Americans were solving a math problem. How do you move millions of tons of fuel, ammunition, and food across an ocean and a continent without stopping? The answer was the Red Ball Express. Thousands of trucks, drivers who didn't sleep, a supply chain running 24 hours a day, pushing material forward faster than the Germans could pull back. Liberty ships were being launched faster than U-boats could sink them. The Americans didn't fight with elegance. They fought with volume, with logistics, with the terrifying efficiency of a nation that had spent the previous decade building things on an industrial scale and had simply redirected that energy toward destruction. The German aristocrats called them businessmen. They weren't wrong. They were just too proud to understand that in this particular war, the businessmen won. Nobody understood this collision of worlds better than the man now rolling up the road in a Jeep. George Patton is one of those figures that history has a habit of flattening. We turn him into a poster, a catchphrase, a slap. We forget that the man had layers that would make most people uncomfortable to sit with. Here's what you need to hold in your head simultaneously. Patton wore ivory-handled revolvers and talked like a man who'd grown up around horses and bad weather. He was profane, theatrical, almost comically aggressive in the way he performed his own persona. And yet, at night, in his tent, by lamplight, he was reading the same German military texts that the general in the limousine had memorized. He knew Rommel's tactical philosophy. He knew the Prussian tradition of the Auftragstaktik, the command style that gave junior officers freedom to act without waiting for orders. He respected German military thinking the way a chess player respects a dangerous opponent. He also knew exactly how to break it. The quickest way to unravel a German commander, Patton had figured out, was speed and chaos. Their perfect plans required predictability. They needed time to execute. Patton's answer was to move so fast and so aggressively that by the time German command understood what was happening, the situation had already changed 3 times. He didn't fight their war. He dragged them into his. So when his Jeep roared up to that crossroads and he saw the limousine sitting there in the mud like a piece of pre-war furniture, he didn't need a briefing. He already knew the man inside. Not by name, by type. He'd been reading about men like this his whole life. He stepped out of the Jeep. His boots hit the mud with that particular heavy sound. Not a splash, but a thud, the sound of wet clay accepting weight reluctantly. He didn't look around for an interpreter, didn't adjust his jacket, didn't give the car the courtesy of a pause. He walked toward it, the way a man walks toward something he intends to move. The rain kept falling, soft, steady, indifferent. The silence on that road had texture. You could hear the rain against the car roof. You could hear someone's equipment shifting, the quiet creak of leather, the half-held breathing of men who were watching something and weren't sure yet what it was going to become. The German general rolled down his window. He had the expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment and was now performing it. He spoke in that clipped, precise cadence, the voice of someone who had been told since childhood that his words carried weight. He wanted a formal ceremony, rank acknowledged, dignity preserved. He wanted the transaction to look a certain way. Patton let him finish. The look on Patton's face during those few seconds, witnesses described it consistently. It wasn't rage, it was something colder and more deliberate than rage. It was the expression of a man watching something that doesn't know yet that it's already over. A flat, patient, total absence of deference. When Patton spoke, he didn't shout. That's the part people always get wrong about him. The real moments weren't loud. They were low, gravelly and precise, the way a good surgeon makes a cut. No wasted motion, no drama, just the clean application of exactly enough force. He told that general what his superior culture had produced. He named it plainly. He told him what rank meant now in a Germany that his own ideology had reduced to ash and body pits. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words landed the way cold water lands, not painful, just suddenly, completely real. He didn't wait for a response. He turned to his military police and gave an order. Simple, flat, final. They reached into that car and they pulled that general out. Not gently, not with the careful choreography of a formal prisoner transfer. They pulled him out the way you pull something out that doesn't belong where it is, and they put him in the mud. The February cold, gray German mud. The same mud the farm kid from Ohio had been sleeping in for 11 months. The same mud that didn't care about anyone's bloodline. The limousine was shoved off the road. It went into the ditch with a sound that was somehow both mundane and enormous. The groan of metal, the soft collapse of something that had been held upright by circumstance and was now just done. You have to understand what Patton had seen 4 days before this, Ohrdruf. A name that doesn't appear in enough history books, given what it was. It was a subcamp of Buchenwald, and when Patton's forces liberated it on April 4th, 1945, Patton walked through it himself, on foot, through the whole thing. He saw the pits. He saw the survivors, men and women who had been reduced by deliberate, systematic starvation and brutality to something that barely resembled what a human being is supposed to look like. He saw the evidence of the industrial infrastructure that had been built specifically to process human beings like raw material. Patton, by every account, was physically ill. He vomited. This man who had planned the destruction of armies without losing sleep, this man stood in that camp and could not hold himself together. He called it the most appalling thing he had ever seen in his life. He made his officers walk through it. He made the mayor of the nearby town walk through it. He wanted no one to have the luxury of not knowing. So when he stood at that car window, looking at a man in a pressed uniform demanding ceremonial respect, he wasn't seeing a defeated soldier. He was seeing a representative of a system that had built Ohrdruf, that had staffed it, that had filed the paperwork for it. His patience wasn't just tactically short, it was morally exhausted. He felt something closer to obligation than anger. Not the hot people associate with his name, something older and heavier than that. An arctic, immovable certainty that this man's dignity was not something the moment owed him, that letting him keep it would be its own kind of lie. Patton's diaries from this period read like dispatches from a man holding two irreconcilable things at once. He could describe the tactical geometry of an armored advance with the clean precision of an engineer. And then, in the next paragraph, write about a child he saw walking a road alone, wearing shoes 2 sizes too large, carrying nothing. He wrote to his wife Beatrice constantly, not the public Patton, the actual one, the one who was haunted by the orphans on the roads, the refugees, the particular quality of silence in a village where everyone was gone. He could build a battle plan for the annihilation of an entire German army and not lose a moment's sleep. A starving child stayed with him for weeks. This is the part of Patton that the posters don't capture. He was hard because the world he was moving through was hard, and softness in that context had a body count. But he never confused hardness with indifference. He never mistook brutality for strength. He believed, genuinely, not performatively, that a soldier's real job, underneath all the tactics and the firepower, was to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. When he pulled that general out of the car, he wasn't just humiliating an enemy. He was saying something to his own men, something they needed to hear without words. He was telling them, "Your mud-covered boots are worth more than everything in that car." He was telling them that the world where important men got to stay clean while other men died in the dirt, that world was over. That the rules of the old order, the ones that said rank and breeding entitled you to be shielded from consequence, were finished. He was taking 11 months of cold food and wet holes and friends killed mid-sentence, and he was validating it. Right there, in the mud, without a speech. If you believe that a leader's real character shows in whether they stand with their people or above them, type Patton right now. Think about the crossroads. Really sit with it for a second. Think about the sound of that limousine going into the ditch. That sound, that particular groan of metal and the soft, final thud of it settling, that is the sound of the 20th century shifting on its axis. It is the end of the gentleman's war. The end of the idea that men of a certain class got to conduct their crimes from behind the insulation of rank and ceremony and well-pressed uniforms. It is the beginning of something that the world was still trying to articulate, that power without accountability is just cruelty with better furniture. Patton understood this in his bones. He understood that if you allow a defeated ideology to retain its pride, you haven't defeated it. You've just paused it. The Prussian general, still in his seat, dignity intact, would go back to his story and tell it a certain way, would construct a narrative in which he had not been broken, only inconvenienced. Patton knew this because he'd read the same history they had. He knew how these men processed defeat. He knew they needed to feel the mud, and there was a calculation underneath the fury. Cold, clear, correct, because liberation isn't just about moving lines on a map. It's about what happens inside people's heads when the fighting stops. You can take every city in Germany and still lose if the men responsible walk away still believing they were right. Patton wasn't just fighting for territory. He was fighting for the terms on which the peace would be built. He refused to give them an inch of psychological ground. We still talk about him because he was not a clean person or a simple one. He was arrogant, difficult, occasionally catastrophic in his judgment. The slapping incident, the comments that almost ended his career more than once. He was not a man you could package neatly, but he had the capacity, rare in any era, rarer still in positions of power, to be the hardest man in the room when the moment required it, without losing the thread back to his own humanity. He knew what the war was for. Not in the abstract, flag-waving sense, in the specific, granular, Ordruf-walking, letter-writing, child-on-the-road sense. He knew what was at stake in the small moments just as clearly as he knew what was at stake in the large ones. The limousine at the crossroads was a small moment. He understood it perfectly. History is not, despite what we're often taught, made primarily in the grand gestures. It's made in moments like this one, on muddy roads in the rain, when a man in a pressed uniform expects deference and gets mud instead. It lives in the diaries and the letters, in the first-hand accounts of soldiers who were there and remembered the sound of that car going into the ditch for the rest of their lives. These are the moments that define what a given era actually believed about itself, not what it said it believed, but what it was willing to do in the rain when nobody was writing the official record. Patton knew that. The mud didn't care about anyone's medals. And that day, in April 1945, neither did he.